Well, thank you all for coming, if just only virtually. Uh, I'm really thrilled to be able to do this. Uh, Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum spent the last 2 years constructing a new welcome center. We've spent even longer on that, planning for it. And this new welcome center is performing a number of functions. It is certainly our new um, admissions desk and museum store, but it is also two exhibition galleries. One of those won't be open for another couple of years, sort of a black box space, about 2,500 square feet, 2,000 square feet, for a future exhibit called Stories from the Shoreline. But where I am standing right now is in our main hall, our watercraft hall, which has a small orientation exhibit and an exhibition of full of watercraft that we are calling Waterlines. And so tonight it is my privilege to be able to introduce you to it, if only virtually. And in Waterlines, we start from the point that we are a museum of culture. We are a museum about place, this special place called the Chesapeake Bay. And we are particularly about the history, culture, and environment of this place. And when we talk about the environment, we do talk about the environment, but we talk about it always in a cultural context. How is it that this place has shaped us and who we are here? And we see that boats embody our identity and the culture of the region. In this place where, if you look at a map of the Chesapeake Bay, where land and water so delicately intertwined, there are all these opportunities to interact with the water. We have really protected waters here, really great places for small craft to, over the years, work and now play. We are using this opportunity to connect with communities that are defined by the water. And our particular approach in this exhibition is to tell stories about boats through stories of the people who are associated with them. This is very much a story-driven exhibition. And so I will get into it, and I will say that we've organized Waterlines into a series of sections, and what I'm standing in front of right now, and where I will start, is what we call racing lines, boats that were built for competition, because you know that whenever two boats have been going in the same direction at the same time, a race has been on, and over time, we've decided that it gets rather expensive if you simply want to outbuild the competition. One of the approaches at the beginning of the 20th century to deal with that was the one design boat. We're all going to get the same boat, at least what is theoretically the same boat, and see actually who's the best sailor on more or less equal boats. And we've seen a number of these. Well, one design racing didn't start on the Chesapeake. It certainly got going on the Chesapeake fairly early on. The Star class was established here in the early 1920s at both ends of the bay, at Gibson Island and at Hampton, both of those, I believe, in 1921 or 1922. And over time, we've seen a number of localities, clubs, adopt their own designs for this purpose of kind of leveling the competition. How do we find out who's the best sailor, not just who can afford the best boat? And a couple of those answers, a couple of those local grown answers are behind me. Up at the top, a boat that emerged in the 1920s. Now, a lot of the clubs through the teens and 20s and 30s around here, because people did not have one design boats, they offered a class for everybody with boats up to 16 feet or boats up to 20 feet. And the 20-foot class got to be sort of one of the prevailing classes that showed up at a number of clubs. And any boat, you could bring any boat that was up to 20 feet in length. Well, ultimately, some folks started, the inevitable happened. People started trying to outdesign, outbuild the competition within that restriction of 20 footers. Over on West River, which is south of Annapolis, southern Anne Arundel County on the Chesapeake Bay, one of those who came up with that answer, outbuilding the competition, was Captain Dick Harchie, Ernest Harchie, but known as Captain Dick. And he built this, what's above me here, this round chine, very, very slick centerboard design, knockabout. That is, it's a sloop rig with no bowsprit, a centerboard and a spade rudder mounted on the transom. And others came to him and had him build then multiples of this boat. In fact, he went so far as to try to build enough of these. He ended up building 30 in total, that he published a brochure. And so I'm going to share with you some of the illustrations that we are using in this exhibition. And let me go to, there we are. So this is from 2 pages of Dick Harchie's brochure of the Chesapeake 20. So you get a sense there's the class symbol that you see on the sail, that sort of yin and yang in red and white on the top of the sail. And you can see that these were sprightly boats. You see crews of 3 and 4 keeping these boats down. This was a lot of rig for a 20-foot boat. Not all of the 20-footers were built by Dick Harchie, and therefore not all of the 20-footers were built to this design. But because Dick Harchie built the large number of them, over time, this sort of the Dick Harchie Chesapeake 20s, the Dick Harchie 20-footers, sort of became a one design class. Ours was retired from the competition, and I'll show you another page of the brochure. Ours was retired from the competition because it got fiberglassed when it got leaky, and when it was fiberglassed, it became too heavy, and so they said, well, this isn't a competitive boat anymore. It got donated to the museum in 1971. Well, today, all the boats that are still surviving and still racing out there have all been fiberglass. So now, if we were to deaccession this could go back into the fleet and be a competitive boat once again. We are telling the story here with this. Here's the next page of the brochure. This was designed, of course, in the 1930s. Ours was built in 1938. Dick Harchie never kept careful records, so we don't know exactly how many were built. But he designed and built this in the day before, prior to self-bailing cockpits. And so he put really wide side decks on it so that you could heel it over and scrub the bottom without swamping the boat. And that was one of the selling points in his brochure. We tell the story of the owner of this boat, the person that Dick Harchie built it for, who was John Coughlin. He's here at the tiller. And in a race, this was a long distance race, relatively long distance, particularly for a small open boat like this, from Annapolis to Gibson Island. That's going under where the Chesapeake Bay Bridge is today, although the Chesapeake Bay Bridge wasn't built back then. A good distance for a 20-footer in a day, and he won this race. This was his last race, because shortly after this race, he went off to the Army Air Force. His plane was damaged and forced to land off of Burma, and he did not survive. His friend John Kramer and his brother Ed Coughlin are there crewing on the boat with him on this particular day. And so this is the story of the veteran's boat and his race to win, his drive to win in his last race. Now I'm going to stop sharing and go down a little bit here and share with you the 2 other boats. the Hampton One design, a boat that was designed down in the lower part of the bay in, as the name implies, Hampton, Virginia, at the request of the Hampton Yacht Club. Now, this boat we tell as the immigrant story. Vincent Serio, who got the commission to design the club's one design boat, Vincent Serio was a Sicilian immigrant. That is, he was born in Sicily, immigrated with his parents as a child, grew up in the Hampton, Newport News area, and when World War I rolled around, he was subject to the draft, although he did not get drafted. He instead, Serio instead did wartime work in wartime shipbuilding at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, which was, of course, churning out boats for the Navy, big ships. Nevertheless, he became, they needed woodworkers. He built his woodworking skills. And after the war, he opened his own boat shop as first Hampton Road Boat Works, and later he named it for himself, Serio Boat Works. Serio became quite a skilled sailor himself, both a boat builder and a sailor. And he offered this design, this 18-foot hard chine design, similar to what would emerge in the same era in different lengths. The Lightning was a little bit larger, the Comet and the Snipe were a little bit smaller. At 18 feet, the Hampton was a nice in-between size. What Hampton felt, Hampton Yacht Club felt, was an affordable boat. And while Serio built a number of these boats himself, to make it affordable, he also turned out a lot of kits. He had patterned every single plank, every single frame, every single piece of boat. And we have all of those. All of those are now in the collection. This boat was built later in his career. This is Hampton number 638, a deluxe Hampton. He had two grades of Hampton. Now, you would think, why are we building boats of different grades? Isn't this a one design class? Well, the deluxe Hampton was simply a higher degree of finish, a little bit more bright work, a little bit more attention to detail on the finish, but fundamentally the same hull, the same rig, the same sails. And it came to us it had been put away after Serio's death in a storage locker down in Newport News. I dragged it on dry rotted tires clear up to Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, a 4-hour drive without tags, and somehow made it. That was a lucky day. Got in here, and we have refreshed the varnish and some of the finishes because some of that had gotten chalky and such in storage over the years. This is more or less as Serio left the boat. He did race it some in his later years. Now, above this one is, you can see a boat under construction on the frame. This is one of Serio's building frames. He was building up to 4 Hamptons at a time. And for some reason, this one, when he left it, had a partially constructed Hampton in frame with the keel, with the transom, with the stem, centerboard trunk, but he never finished it. So from basically here on down is the building frame. Everything above that is the frame of the new Hampton. So we've chosen to exhibit the incomplete Hampton along with the Serio's deluxe Hampton as showing the boat builder's process. I will share a couple of photos that a couple of images that we use.
Oh, a woman.
There we go.
Some guy on the phone.
All right. I'm sharing, and are we going to advance? Advancing before. See if I can advance it.
For those who have just signed on, please mute your microphones.
All right. This is working a little bit more awkwardly than I anticipated, but we'll bear with me for a moment here. And there we are. Share Siria's look at, there's his shop. He was building Hamptons, he was doing other work, and you can see other boats, military boats hauled up on his marine railway by his shop. This was his product, the Hampton One design at not the home club, Hampton Yacht Club, but rather across Hampton Roads at the Norfolk Yacht and Country Club, as youth there are rigging up for a regatta. You can see it was, and this particular design was used. I don't think it spread beyond the Chesapeake Bay, but it was used at quite a number of clubs in both Virginia and Maryland. Closest to where I am in St. Michael's in Cambridge, Maryland, and the Cambridge fleet survived until fairly recently. Here's one sailing even farther north up at the Corsica River Yacht Club on Chester River. Now, let's see if I can. Now I'm going to shift a little bit to some other boats here, and share with you the next section, which is learning the lines. These are boats that are, and I'll step out of the way here. These are boats that are boats for youth, and the one all the way on the bottom there is a St. Michael's sailing scow. All right, doesn't show up very well here, so we're going to go ahead and share. One of the illustrations that we use. The St. Michael Sailing Scow, as it implies, was for our local club, the Miles River Yacht Club, a homegrown design for youth, as we put it in here. Plans drawn up by the then new Miles River Yacht Club's Commodore Nick Hardcastle. He wanted to start a youth sailing program, and so he came up with these plans for a home-built scow. All of them were home-built. None of them were professionally built. 12 feet long, 4 feet wide, with a fairly simple sloop rig and a transom hung rudder. Pretty boxy, pretty simple. And our particular one was built not in St. Michael's, but in Baltimore by a family that summered in St. Michael's. Herbert Barnes Aldrich was the father. He built this for his sons, Walter and Ralph, in their garage in Baltimore. And the wonderful story here, this is the family story. They built it in 2 weeks when Mom was out of town because she disapproved of the project. Got to get it done before Mom comes home. I got to interview one of the St. Michael sailors who crewed in one of these boats back in the 1930s, and he didn't recall an awful lot. He claimed that he didn't really see much of the rest of the fleet because his head was in the bilge the whole time, bailing the things out because they leaked so badly. I think that some were better constructed than others. But the idea here is this was just as simple as possible for home building to get youth out on the water. There were better attempts to do this, and why does it not want to advance? There we go. The boat just above it on the rack is not a home built boat. It's actually a Class B outboard racer, built by a company up in New Jersey. What's that doing on the Chesapeake Bay? This is a Sid craft, and Class B outboards were built by Sid Craft in New Jersey for to take a 10 horsepower outboard motor. And of course, if you wanted the most powerful 10 horsepower you could get in those days, you bought a Mercury. They tended to outproduce what they were rated at. So this particular Sid Craft does have a Chesapeake-based story. It was purchased by the father of Jack and Teddy Nelson. This is Jack Nelson in the photograph here, towing his brother Teddy behind, not the Sid Craft, behind a larger boat, water skiing. Teddy was the older brother, and he was the first to race this boat. The Highland Beach was an African-American resort. It was actually founded in the 1890s by Frederick Douglass for essentially the Black upper middle class, the professional class of Washington, D.C. This was their weekend and summer home away from the city, an enclave of Black residents who summered on the bay. And what the youth of Highland Beach did was not sail, but race these Class B outboards. And so Dr. Nelson, he was a physician, bought this Sid Craft. He heard that this was the best Class B outboard you could get, bought it for his son Teddy. His younger son Jack later used the boat as well. And they would go around to competitions around the bay, just as youth sailing programs did around the bay. There were youth outboard motor racing programs as well. Above it, and I'll shift out of here just for a moment and show you a bit on the larger screen here. We have the Sid Craft, which they named Big Bad Sid. We left this completely unrestored. It is showing all of its wear and repairs and so forth. It was never refinished by the family. It is basically as they left it, and we've chosen to show it with nothing but the dust and dirt taken off of it. It will not be gussied up, but left as they did at the end of when they laid it up after they grew out of it. Above the Sid Craft is probably for a generation the best known youth sailing boat, though it didn't start that way. It's a Penguin, a Phil Rhodes design from 1939. He was approached by a member of the head of the Potomac River Sailing Association, Bill Heinz, and Bill asked for a boat to be used in frostbiting for winter sailing. You look at this boat and you wonder what on earth would inspire you to sail in cold weather on this boat. It is an 11.5-foot one sail dinghy, no decks or anything like that. You're awfully close to the water, but nevertheless, that's how the Potomac River Sailing Association started with it. And they built half a dozen of these in the winter of 1939 to 1940 and began frostbiting them the following season. However, before too long, this really caught on as a youth training boat. And while it started here on the bay, it spread to many other areas, and over 10,000 hull numbers were issued over the years. There still are a few Penguins sailing around, although they've really been superseded by designs with self-bailing cockpits. Now, let me screen share again. See how adroit I'm getting at this. Go to full screen. There we are. This is this boat, Penguin number 1. If you've been to the museum before, you saw it on exhibit up to 20 years ago in our small boat shed. It was then exhibited again in our Broadreach 50 Years of Collecting exhibition in 2015 to 2016, and has gone back into storage. And so this is one of several boats that has come out of storage for this exhibition. I will say that the Sid Craft that I just showed you is being exhibited for the first time. Never been exhibited before. Newer acquisition, that was 2010. We have Bill Heinz's own penguin, which he named Judy. And in fact, we put it overboard and did sail it. This is a photograph that we took for our 50th anniversary exhibition. It has been fiberglassed, and like the Chesapeake 20, it was donated to the museum because it got too heavy to be competitive after it had been fiberglassed. We've done some cosmetic repairs to it, but it is largely intact as it came to us. We probably will not sail it again. It's an object in the collection. Penguins were built, as I said, for home building. As the class turned out, produced these Phil Rhodes's designs with a little ease for home building, but many of them were professionally built. Ours, of course, as part of that first fleet, was a home-built Penguin. The story that we've chosen to tell with this Penguin, however, is not Bill Heinz's story, though we mentioned him here certainly. We've chosen to, because it became such a popular youth sailing boat, we told the story of a youth who learned to sail on this boat, and that is a woman by the name of Ann Keck, who grew up in Richmond and spent summers in Deltaville learning to sail at Fishing Bay Yacht Club. And here she is rigging up her Penguin with her crew, Freddie Todman. Ann Keck has now passed away, married, became Ann Redman, but we've been in touch with her daughter and tracked down her history. Early on in her sailing career, you get a sense from her quotes over time about how she climbed the learning curve. Early on, she was quoted as saying, "I can just keep the boat from capsizing. The first time I sailed, my ship turned over right in the middle of the bay." By 1952, she was awarded as Fishing Bay Yacht Club's most accomplished junior sailor at the age of 16. And in 1954, 1955, she was rated by the Chesapeake Bay Yacht Racing Association as placing first, and then the following year third in the CBYRA Women's Championship. When this photo was taken in 1953, she was quoted as saying that the boat teaches you the value of split-second teamwork and responsibility. Although it is a single-sail boat, it is a double-handed boat. So always, or typically anyway, two sailing the Penguin. We have one more very local type in this section, and that's the LJ Scow, a funny local design named for its designer, or the initials of its designer, Lowndes Johnson. Lowndes was a world champion star sailor. That is, he was crew with his brother, and together they became world champions in the star class in 1929. His younger brother, the skipper, passed away, and a few years later, they had been sailing at the time of the championship for the Gibson Island Yacht Squadron, not far from Baltimore. And having made friends there, the Gibson Island Yacht Squadron asked Johnson to build or to design them a junior sailor for home building, and he came up with this scow design. Scow really sells it short. It's a pram. It's really elegantly designed, 11 feet long, 5 feet wide, so it conforms to the rules of the Moth class. So while this particular class, the LJ class, was only sailed by one club, Gibson Island, these boats could have competed with the Moth class, which was much more widespread. In fact, there's a version of the Moth class still racing today. In fact, the Moth class is split into sort of the Moth and then the classic Moths for the ones that have been completely outclassed by, well, they're going all kinds of ways with the Moth, first with built-in hiking seats, and now I think they're even going with foils. You can get a foiling Moth. Crazy boats. The Moth, the LJ that we have is a later one. These were designed in 1934, and the first generation of them were cross-planked out of cedar. This one was built of plywood after World War II, 1940, the winter of 1947 to 48. Built by two cousins, John Flanagan and Patrick Flanagan, for their kids. They built a couple of these boats, but they built them together. And this was for John Flanagan's kids at the Gibson Island Yacht Squadron youth program. They didn't get to use this as youth sailing boats for very long, though, because Gibson Island, shortly after this, adopted the Penguin as their boat, and the boat went into storage. Incidentally, it's a terrible boat up here. The centerboard is a steel plate. It weighs about as much as the rest of the boat. It's kind of ridiculous, but a home built boat that was a solution for youth racing. All right, now I'm going to shift again to another section here and talk about the simplest of boats on the bay. And let me stop sharing. And I've got a few boats. All the boats are around the perimeter of the room on these cantilever racks. There are interpretive panels down below that share the stories of the people and the photos that provide accompanying interpretation. Before I came to the museum, my predecessor had never collected a simple flat iron skiff. Flat iron skiffs were regarded as too common, not special, not really particular to the Chesapeake Bay, ubiquitous boats. You could find them anywhere. And yet in the intervening 30 years or so, they've been drying up. They've been disappearing. And so we have collected a couple of these simple flat iron skiffs. The one above, there's number 2 on the rack here, was home built by Charles Parks, a waterman, not a boat builder, who built the simple slab-sided, cross-planked, iron-fastened flat iron skiff to tend his crab floats. He was a Hoppers Island waterman, and he had a number of, the way you shed crabs back then is you built these floats, you put peeler crabs in them, and then every few hours you had to row out or pull out to your crab floats and fish out the soft crabs, the ones that had shed their shells. If you didn't fish them out, one of two things happened. Either another crab got to that delicious soft crab and cannibalized it, or it hardened. If you left it too long, it hardened up and became kind of a leathery shell as it grew its new shell, became unmarketable. So every few hours you had to go out and fish up your crab floats. This was the home built vessel that Charles Parks built for doing that sometime in the 20s. Certainly it was around by the 1933 storm, the August storm of 1933, the storm that cut the Ocean City Inlet and did an awful lot of damage around the bay, brought huge surges up the bay, not equaled again until 2003 with Hurricane Isabel. And Charles Parks was worried about losing his business, his crab floats, his waterfront business, and he went out in this boat to try to secure things, weathered the storm overnight in this boat. It didn't sink, it didn't swamp. Somehow that modest little boat saved his life. But it is the crudest of flat iron skiffs, contrasted to the one below it, which was built by Lowndes Johnson, the same Lowndes Johnson who designed the LJ class, and a much more elegant, a nice sweeping sheer, flare to the sides, a natural crook breast hook and transom knees, and just nice little touches. Lowndes Johnson used this boat. Again, this was a workboat, and in this section, this whole section, we're looking at boats for work, boats that were that had a job. And we think of that on the Chesapeake Bay as boats that were for the fisheries, but these go beyond the fisheries. In Charles Parks's case, it was for certainly fisheries related, for fishing out soft crabs from the peeler traps, from the peeler floats. In Lowndes Johnson's case, it was because he didn't have much of a wharf, and all of his boats and the boats that he tended for others were kept on stakes out in the river just off of his house, and he had to get to them. And he used this boat, this simple flat iron skiff, to get to them. And so I have some pictures to share. And let me share screen once again. We just found this. Get to whoops. Jump ahead. There is Lowndes Johnson, and I wish I knew the woman that he was with, some friend, in this same boat. This turned up, our local historical society published this photo as a mystery photo on their Facebook page recently, and my mother actually was able to identify it because Lowndes Johnson is her uncle. And from that, we were able to identify the boat. That's our boat. That's our simple flat iron skiff. And you can see the boats that he kept on stakes, although he's not using the boat at the moment to go out to tend those boats, rather he's got oyster nippers. He and this female companion have nippers in their hands, and they're catching a few oysters, which, sad to say, are no longer growing there. You could do this in shallow waters when they were clear enough, and pick out your prime oysters. Lowndes was a professional boat builder. This is him building one of his later star boats in his boat shop, that same shop where the flat iron skiff, that simple skiff, was built. He ended up rebuilding that boat. He couldn't stop the leaks, and in 1959 he took it into the shop and started rebuilding it. And as he was a faithful diarist, he kept a diary from the time he was in his 20s until the day before he died in 1971. And he recorded this. He said, "I found the stern was a little rotten, so I had to take it out. If I had known she was so bad, I would have built a new boat. But he didn't. He repaired this one, and we have it here. Again, we've left it entirely unrestored as we found it here." We're going to go on to another boat in this working section, which is Glide, a log canoe, and a particularly early log canoe. Glide is a small boat, a delicate little boat, just a 20-foot log canoe, and here it is behind me, and I found we found several pictures of it sailing. This particular photo was taken in 1964, which is when the boat was about a century old already. Glide was built by a celebrated Dorchester County boat builder and marine carver, Washington Hammond Skinner. We believe, or the donor believed, sometime around 1864. We'll never note that. We'll never know that for certain, because there are not written records that can confirm that. That's simply the oral history on this. And we have chosen, it was built on the Little Choptank River. And the Little Choptank River in Dorchester County is the same area where, frankly, not too far from where Harriet Tubman lived, just north of where Harriet Tubman escaped to freedom and later returned to liberate people. And we have chosen one of the stories, not one of Harriet Tubman's escape stories, but another one from that same area. There's an escape that took place just across the creek from where this boat was built in a 23-foot log canoe. a boat of this period, of this size, from the same area. And so this is the story, one of the stories that we're choosing to tell with Glide, this little log canoe, was this escape to freedom. And let me share again. Take this to full screen. There's Glide. Here we are with the runaway slave notice. And you can see in this runaway slave notice on the left-hand side about how Nellie Keene was helped to escape, and her husband were helped to escape by her father, or maybe it was her father-in-law, Joseph Keene. They embarked, it says, in a sail canoe belonging to the subscriber, signed below. The subscriber is Levin Wolford, a common name, Dorchester County name. They embarked in a sail canoe belonging to the subscriber, about 23 feet long, white above the water with one gaff sail, it having been stripped of all other sails, and being pioneered by Joe, who is a sailor of some experience and notoriety, and a shrewd, crafty fellow, now a fugitive from a Southern master. So boats like this, and he goes on to presume that they are going to, will probably aim to pass up the bay and through the C&D Canal. We don't know exactly how they escaped, whether that was by the C&D Canal or by some other route, but in fact, there's no record of their recovery. We believe that these are among those who took the maritime Underground Railroad to freedom in a boat much like Glide. So we're using these boats to tell stories that are particular to these boats. In this case, we're using it to tell a story that's about a boat very much like this one. Not a story connected particularly to Glide, but to one of her type. Just below Glide is the largest boat in the room, a workboat named Alberta. And there you can see the cabin of Alberta behind me. And I'm sharing the screen showing one of two pictures, just two photos that we have of this wonderful workboat, built on Kent Island. And one of the particular styles of boats that was had its origins is indigenous to the Chesapeake Bay, a log canoe built of 5 logs, like the Glide above it. Well, Glide was built of 3 logs. Alberta was built of 5 logs, but Alberta, unlike Glide, never was rigged for sail. This was built in the early 20th century, and from the start had an engine installed. In fact, over the years, it had a series of engines, one of several converted automobile engines, including a 4-cylinder Jeep. It doesn't have an engine today. I would love to find a 4-cylinder Jeep engine to stick in this boat. Both of our photos of it show it on the day of a classic boat parade off of Cambridge. Lots of pretty yachts and this workboat that showed up. And the story that we're telling is of one of the watermen who owned this boat over the years, a black waterman, also from Kent Island, where the boat was built, by the name of Fillmore King. And Phil King was an oysterman, acquired this boat. Watermen loved these log-built boats because they had so much mass to them. And on the winter waters in the chop, they provided a relatively stable platform because of that mass. You would stand up on the washboards and tong oysters from the side of it. In the summer, perhaps crabbing, as that caught on during the 20th century. But chiefly, this was an oystering boat, and chiefly in the census records, Phil King listed himself as an oysterman. He made enough money to buy a house with a mortgage. His wife took and washed for the neighbors. Phil King, like watermen of his day, kept going until he physically could not anymore. Oystered into his 1970s, and in his final years, he he outlived his wife and he moved in with a roomer. He was a boarder in another house, that is. And I guess I should stop screen sharing and show you this a bit of this boat behind me. It's a 35-foot boat. It's a big boat to put inside, and it's the largest boat that we've put inside this exhibition space. Now, this is the TSCA. So you're wondering, where are all the wonderful small craft? Show me something good. So I've saved that for the last. And as I swivel around here, I will share the final section that I'm going to share of the exhibition tonight, which is our Lines of Tradition exhibit. These are boats that are all traditional Chesapeake Bay types. There's a log canoe in there, but all the rest are dead rise skiffs or dead rise bateaus. The sorts of boats that we used as crabbing skiffs on the bay. Every single one of these boats, however, has a story of going from workboat to a recreational boat. They are all boats that oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting. What is the double-ended punt on rack number 1? Pardon me, I'll catch up on that question. Yes. All the way on the top there. All the way on the top there is it's a tiny little boat. Again, was used for servicing, also built by Lowndes Johnson. We've got a lot of boats associated with him in our collection. This one was built for tending his boats in the winter. In the winter, he took his boats up into a cove because out front of his house, he was worried about moving ice. And he needed to check on them during the winter. And so he built this boat, lightweight, could be pulled out of the water, put back in, and had ice runners on the bottom. Again, elegantly built out with little transom knees. Of course, it's a pram, so it's both got transom knees, got a transom both in the bow and the stern, and a lift-out seat in the stern seat. It was such a small boat at 7 feet 11, and Lowndes Johnson was not a big guy, that he had to take that seat out because he needed a place to put his foot when rowing this little pram over to the nearby cove. It's a delightful little boat, and he did record in his diary that after he finished it, he called it Little Dipper, and you might think that that's named for the constellation, but I think it was named for the nickname for the duck. The bufflehead duck he referred to as Dipper, and he named many of his boats for waterfowl, widgeon, and believe it or not, trash duck. He named one of his boats Trash Duck. It wasn't insulting. It's just what he called merganser ducks, trash duck. Anyway, that's this delightful little pram. So just saw that question in the chat. So back over to the Lines of Tradition. All boats that were built for work or designed for work or inspired by work boats, but then became pleasure boats. And the one on the top up here is one that I'll particularly feature here. Inspired by the Chesapeake Bay crabbing skiff, but this Ghost never worked. Ghost was used by a yachtsman who wanted a traditional looking boat. In the introduction to Chappelle's American Small Sailing Craft, he talks about why is he doing this? Why is he documenting traditional small craft? Why is he publishing his designs? He is encouraging people to use these boats, thinking that if these boats were suited to their local waters for work, they might be equally suited to those same waters for recreational purposes. And so a lot of these boats, some of these boats started as work boats. The one below it, Lark, actually started as a waterman's workboat. And then later got purchased by a family who used it for their kids for summer adventures down the Sassafras River. Ghost was the same. It was used on the Severn River above Annapolis, and I'll share. Let me go back to sharing screen here. Oh, and full screen. There we are. The Boylan family that owned Ghost had as their main boat yet another old workboat that had been converted to a yacht. In this case, it was the square stern Bug-Eye, the Richard J. Vetra, and you can see the large boat in this photograph at their home wharf has a big yacht cabin built up in the middle of the deck. In its workboat days, it would have had an open working deck with oyster winders and rollers over the side and so forth. But like a lot of these old workboats, as Frank Mooreshead told me, you could get a lot of boat for your money if you bought an old workboat. Frank Mooreshead's father had bought the old Pungy Kessie C. Price and converted it. It was already converted to a yacht. Used it for a yacht. And used it to entertain. He was a Philadelphia lawyer. Used it to entertain his customers on the bay. Said the boat paid for itself in its first season. Well, here this family was using the same. Oh, I do have to share a story about Frank Mooreshead. At one point, Frank Mooreshead had a pretty little dinghy, perhaps something like Lowndes Johnson's, but with a little bit of washboards and even a small stern deck and so forth. And at some point, his dinghy went adrift. He lost his dinghy, prize dinghy, had built it himself. And not too many months later, or maybe the following season, he saw another boat in the harbor, rowed about by, and he thought that looked an awful lot like his boat. So he went up to the guy and said, "So how long have you owned that boat? It looks like one that I've lost." And the man said, "Oh, this has been my boat for a year. I've had this boat for years. This couldn't be the boat that you just lost." And Frank Mooreshead said, well, can you do me a favor? Could you reach under the stern deck and feel the underside of the planking on the stern deck? The guy gave him a kind of a puzzled look, but he convinced him to do it. He went and felt under. He said, "Do you feel something underneath that stern deck?" The guy said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Can you tell me why you carved my initials on the underside of your stern deck?" He got his dinghy back. Anyway, back to Ghost. This Ghost you see at the family's dock, lying parallel to. He had two boats built, two small boats built that he towed around behind the Richard J. Vetra. And Ghost is that one lying parallel there. A lot of rig, single sail, and this boat was built by one of the celebrated boat builders on the Western Shore, not too far, just across the creek, in fact, from Dick Harchie. Charles Edward Leatherbury, or Captain Ed. And Ed Leatherbury, there he is on the left. Ed Leatherbury actually made his living as a steamboat captain. And in the 30s, as he was getting into his up toward 70 years old, the steamboat stopped running. The Depression killed off the steamboat business, and he was out of the job. Well, he'd been building boats on the side all of his life. There he is. You see him posed next to a 7-log canoe that he was building that would become a racing boat. On the right, in retirement in the 1930s, he built himself a whole fleet of livery boats that he would rent out by the day and by the hour to visitors from Washington who would come to his town of Shadyside and were looking for recreation on the water. And he would rent out a simple little boat, one mast, one sail, ruggedly built, a whole fleet of these. He knew how to build an elegant boat like Ghost. Ghost has this beautiful sheer, flaring sides, just a sweet little shape, a sweet interpretation. But these other boats, these livery boats, they were kind of very heavily built, a little bit more conservatively rigged. When he got tired of them, he sold the whole fleet off to his neighbor across the creek, Captain Dick Harchie. They did the same thing with the fleet. The fleet was sold a second time to the Smith family, who sold a few of the boats off, including Ava, which we have here, and that's Ava down on the lower portion of this rack over here. So we have two of Captain Ed Leatherbury's boats here: his elegant Ghost and his functional Ava. Both of them built for recreation. Both of them inspired by the Chesapeake Bay crabbing skiff. There are two more sections of boats in here. We have Shorelines, which features waterfowling boats, and we have Lines of Production, which features a production-built runabout, a kit-built Chesapeake Lightcraft kayak. Yes, there's one of those in a museum now here, and I will have to confess to you, a plastic boat, a windsurfer, built in the 1970s with the teak wishbone, an early version of the sailboard, and one that was used on the bay. There's one more section to come where we will introduce, that's not installed yet, where we will introduce the Chesapeake version of the Perfect Skiff. Come back and take a look at that. And with that, I will break and see if there are any questions.
You have a couple in the chat.
I have a couple in the chat. Okay. Oh, I see new messages. Were the bumpkins and boom overhang included in the length limits on the 20-foot and other classes? No, they were not. That boom overhang, that bumpkin did not count against the length. It was simply the length on deck. And so they got the most out of these boats. Any others? Well, if not, I want to thank you all for joining me virtually this evening and getting a little peek at our new Craft Heritage exhibition. I will tell you that while it is open, it is not complete. And you will see us continue to add bits and pieces, accoutrements to boats, things that went along with the boats, additional stories, and we're going to continue to augment this boat over the coming years. We're actually in the process of working some of the spars in here. A couple of the boats, one boat anyway, will have a stub mast and its boom set. Others, just so that you can get a sense of the scale of the rig, we will mount along with the boats here, sort of behind them on those cantilever racks.
That's an excellent exhibit.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Good to see you.
Great to see you too.
Thanks, Pete. If any of you haven't been to the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, you really should go. Pete's been taking us through their new exhibit, but in the old crab processing building they have there, they have quite a few traditional boats that have been unrestored, and that's really the only way to study how a traditional boat was built, to look at them before they were before someone has modified them and taken them to be a yacht. So and so for all of you that are here, we appreciate you being here. We hope you will join the TSCA and help us support these kind of presentations, and also support your local museum and your local sailing clubs, that particularly the ones that help and teach children to sail. That's always important, to get them on the water. So if anybody else has anything to say.
Did you pitch for council?
I just did a brief thing early on, but we are going to we need people to volunteer to be council members for the Traditional Small Craft Association. All it takes is a desire and a love of traditional small craft to join us So,
Pete, is the
Very
red
good.
and white paint that all these boats are in the only paint you have or the only paint they use in the Chesapeake?
Well,
That's
uh,
darn and house paint.
when you get to when you get to the work boats anyway, that was at least in the 20th century the preferred character, the preferred color, the prevalent color. The recreational boats and so forth are in other colors, but those 20th century work boats were largely painted with white lead without other pigment. In the 19th century, there was really a lot more color variety, a lot of green, some other colors, and some boats that had no color at all that were coated simply with pine tar, and so over time would simply darken down to almost black. But these boats are all from a little bit later on, and so we don't have any, except for Glide, of course, which probably did not look like this in the mid 19th century, but by the time it came to us, had long had white topsides and red copper bottom. The red copper bottom is certainly was certainly the prevalent color here. Much of it became available in, I think it was the 1880s, through the Baltimore Copper Paint Company. So that was a locally available material on the bay.
the other thing, Pete, that you talked about quite a bit was home-built boats for different classes and things. And we tend to think now there's a resurgence of people building boats at home and kit boats and all that and everything. But, you know, in the 30s and 40s, that was like the norm. The Snipe was designed and, you know, for being home built. You know, most of them, and while a lot of them were professionally built, there were still, every class had home-built boats. And, you know, you look back in the Boy Scout manual in the 30s, you know, the boats that they had these kids building with a handsaw and a hammer, you know, would tax most of us these days. But it's a very common thing to build home-built boats throughout the 20th century. So,
Well, thank you all for joining me, and I appreciate you. Please do come and visit.
Pete, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
Did a great
Yeah.
show. Yay.
Thanks a lot, Pete.
great presentation. Thank
Okay,
you,
and you had
everyone.
44 people signed in and watching.
Wow, very good.
Good job.
Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
It was good, really good.
Okay, we're signing off then.
Okay, I will close the show.